Thank you all for coming. Good evening and welcome to this very special event celebrating I've Got the Light of Freedom, the organizing tradition, and the Mississippi freedom struggle. We honor the distinguished professor and director of the Cornwall Center, Dr. Charles Payne, who is a bright light in our department. I'm sorry, Dr. Payne, we'll be using light as a metaphor throughout this talk. I'll stop. I won't sing this little light of mine.
We really are.
My name is Darian J. Davis, and I am the chair of Africana Studies, a department that sheds light on the experiences of Africans and people of the African diaspora. We offer a dynamic major and minor that prepares students to live in the world with meaning. From majors that become mayors of New York City, to cooks, to teachers, to workers in business and in tech. We begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather in Newark is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Munsee Lenape people. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, and honor their stewardship of this land throughout the generations. I will introduce the distinguished guests who will speak tonight, and I will invite Dr. Cooper and Dr. Payne to come up to the stage. I want to express my gratitude to everyone here. You've come today to help to forge community. A special shout out to everyone who helped to bring this event to fruition. Of course, again, Dr. Melissa Cooper, an affiliate of Africana Studies, and an architect really of this program. Thank you to Miss Christina Strasburger, without whom this program and many others would not be possible. Thank you to Mihan and all the other organizers who helped to prepare this event. Finally, a special thank you to the sponsors, the Sheila Y. Oliver Center for Politics and Race in America, the Department of History, the Joseph C. Cornwall Center for Metropolitan Studies, and the Black Organization of Students, or BOSS. Now a short word on our two speakers. The people who will be in conversation today.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I could speak at length on both of these individuals, but we only have limited time. So I've just taken two aspects of their biography that helps to give us just a little insight into who these individuals are. The first is Dr. Jacqueline S. Mattis, who earned her PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Michigan. She is also an affiliate of the Africana Studies Department. Among her many contributions to academia and community building, I want to highlight her research that focuses on the role of religion and spirituality in the lives of African Americans and Afro-Caribbean youth and adults. Among her honors, she is the recipient of the Distinguished Psychologist Award from the Association of Black Psychologists and the Outstanding Mentor Award for the University of Michigan's Undergraduate Research Opportunities Program. As Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, Newark, since July 1st, 2020, she has guided the university through the most difficult challenges in the university's history. That is the COVID-19 pandemic. She's a mentor to many faculty, many department chairs, and to many students. Please welcome Dr. Jacqueline S. Mattis. Secondly, we have Dr. Melissa L. Cooper. Dr. Cooper is currently Associate Professor of History at Rutgers-Newark and Faculty Director of the Clement A. Price Humanities Scholars Program. Dr. Cooper won an Andrew Carnegie Fellowship from the Carnegie Corporation She was also scholar in residence at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture and recipient of the Rutgers University Board of Trustees Award for Excellence in Research. She is the author of the groundbreaking historical study, Making Gullah, A History of the Sapelo Islanders' Race and the American Imagination. Dr. Cooper's book was discussed, or has been discussed, in many forums, including the New Yorker, the Atlanta Journal, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She has appeared in several documentaries, most recently Great Migrations, A People on the Move, that just aired on PBS in 2025, and you can still download it on any PBS app. Please welcome both Dr. Mattis and Dr. Cooper. So the way that this is going to work from here on in, I will invite Dr. Mattis to come and give words to the audience, and then I will invite Dr. Cooper and Dr. Payne to sit with us on the stage. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I think we can do it.
Good
morning. Good evening.
Good evening.
Excellent. I am incredibly excited to be here tonight. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm incredibly excited to be here tonight, and I'm super grateful to have been asked to give opening remarks, and I'll be brief, I promise. I'm excited to bear witness to a conversation between two incredibly brilliant, thoughtful people, Dr. Melissa Cooper and Dr. Charles Payne, both of whom I hold in incredibly deep regard. I'm excited because we're having this discussion in this particular sociopolitical moment. And we're having this discussion in a moment when it's a privilege to hear from two people who demonstrated such a deep capacity to tell the story of journeys that we need to hear. In the last several months, we've heard again and again that we're living in unprecedented times. We have heard that organized terror, unjust incarcerations, intimidation, unrepentant lies and dehumanization, disappearings, brutal state-sanctioned beatings and murders, that all of these things are shocking, and that this is not America. That's a lot. We have seen people flabbergasted by institutional and corporate leaders and state actors, judges, sheriffs, elected officials, ministers who capitulate, endorse harm, people who race to occupy seats at the bottom of society's moral spaces, and who espouse positions so foul and so unjust that we wonder at their humanity. Enter Charles Payne's I've Got the Light of Freedom. This book pierces into our consciousness 4 decades after its publication. And this re-engagement is timely. I've Got the Light of Freedom is a historical masterpiece written in the Black storytelling tradition. In this work, Dr. Payne pushes against America's appetite for sanitized, Disneyfied versions of history, the versions of history where the fight for civil rights is reduced to a single march, a few black and white photos of caricatured figures, a couple of gospel songs, a few lines from Dr. King's speech about a dream, and a kumbaya moment when the nation miraculously comes to its senses, acknowledges the error of its ways, and everyone is granted equal rights, cue the music, and everyone is loved. Like other transformative historical and sociological works, though, this work is powerful for one reason, at least one reason that I can sort of see saliently tonight. I've Got the Light of Freedom is a clear-headed analytic and strategic masterpiece. It is a playbook. On one hand, we see the ways that structures of power use violence, intimidation, infiltration, surveillance, capitulation, and other forms of coercive power to undermine justice. This book is part of a lineage of works that makes clear that statist violence and organized funding, defunding, and erasures of knowledge and programs and people are not just casualties of irrationality or racism. These are not spontaneous acts. They are calculated and they're targeted. The people and the books and the exhibits and the programs that are being erased are being targeted because history has shown that they employ strategies that are successful in disrupting systems and structures of injustice. On the other hand, we see counter moves that worked. We see the value of the playbook in the pithy social analytic insights of organizers cited by Dr. Payne, like Jean Wheeler-Smith, who noted our adherence to the organizing principle that you find people who are already working and you build on what they are doing was the basis of our strength. That kind of playbook, that part of the playbook, as well as other parts of the playbook, demonstrate that there are things that we can turn to in this book to get our way to the next good place. Equally important, this work is a playbook that demonstrates the stealthy power of principled people. Aunties and cousins and neighbors, college students, congregation members, ministers who showed up in kitchens and backyards to cook up a disruptive nation-changing movement. Cousins who showed up to help with rent money. Beauticians who risked their own lives to make a home space for young men working for SNCC. It is a text about scandalous and cowardly people who took cover and ridiculed and undermined people during the heat of the moment, but yet showed up to lay claim to its fruits when all was said and done. This book is an account of ordinary people who created web-like networks of support and strategy, people who weathered the starts and stops and failures and shifts in the movement, and who got to victories that we get to enjoy now. So tonight, for me, is not a moment of sentimentality. It's not a sentimental revisiting of a book 40 years later. Tonight is a moment of reactivation of a strategic text. Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing from Dr. Melissa Cooper and Dr. Charles Payne, the author of this amazing playbook. Let the conversation begin.
No.
Yeah.
Oh,
Just
like go or thank you.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming. Hopefully you can hear me. I want to give Dr. Payne a proper introduction so that you know who the author of this book is. Dr. Charles Payne directs the Cornwall Center and is the Henry Rutgers Distinguished Professor of Africana Studies. His interests include urban education, school reform, social inequality, social change, and modern African American history. His books include So Much Reform, So Little Change, which examines the persistence and failure in urban schools, and a co-edited anthology, Teach Freedom, the African American Tradition of Education for Liberation. Time Longer Than a Rope, A Century of African American Activism, 1850 to 1950. And the book that we're gathered to discuss today, I've Got the Light of Freedom, The Organizing Tradition and the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. The latter has won awards from the Southern Regional Council, Choice Magazine, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and Gustavus Meyer Center for the Study of Human Rights in North America. His most recent book is a co-edited anthology, Dignity Affirming Education, Cultivating the Somebodyness of Students and Educators. His current book projects include When the World Comes for Your Children, Defending Black Children in the Age of Trump, with Van Dean Campbell, The Power of Possibility, Reframing Debates on Education and Inequality. He's won a number of teaching awards, including being named to the Bass Society of Fellows for Excellence in Teaching and Research at Duke University, and holding a Charles Deering McCormick Professorship of Teaching Excellence at Northwestern. The prize for Best Undergraduate Thesis in Education at the University of Chicago is named after him. He chaired the African American Studies departments at Northwestern and Duke. He served briefly as Chief Education Officer at Chicago Public Schools. Payne grew up in South Jersey, graduating from Millville High School. He's very proud of the fact that he earned one of the country's first bachelor's degrees in African American Studies from Syracuse University in 1970. His doctorate, this is going to be important, y'all. His doctorate is in sociology from Northwestern. Dr. Payne, we salute you and we welcome you to this conversation. Okay. All right, folks, got my glasses. I'm ready to go. There's some things that you need to know about this book, which I first encountered in graduate school. So my celebrating this text and being in conversation with Charles Payne about it is a long time coming. And I'm so happy to finally have this moment. Dr. Payne's book, for those of you who don't know, is I had to innovate a word. I could use the term groundbreaking, but that's, beyond hackneyed and well-worn. I made up a term for his work, and I'm going to call it field shaking. This is a field shaking history on the Black organizing tradition and the freedom struggle. And for 30 years, readers inside and outside of the academy, they've gone to this book to relearn everything they thought they knew about the civil rights movement. And scholars who picked up the book for the first time learned valuable lessons about what researchers can see and find when they turn the observational lens from notable figures and big people and big names, and they look to the people on the ground and in communities who are actually pushing for change. So in this way, I've Got the Light of Freedom has been hailed by reviewers and readers in every corner. And I just want to give you just a little sample of what words have been dedicated in journals to this book in celebration of its intervention and its merits. So the American Historical Association's journal, in that journal appeared these words about your book, quote, "In short, this is the most original and imaginative analysis of the civil rights movement to come along in many years. It is as careful as it is bold, and its implications extend far beyond the temporal and spatial boundaries Payne modestly imposes on his argument." Close quote. The Law and History Review said, quote, "It is Payne's task to help us remember those who the world would forget," close quote. The Journal of Southern History said, quote, "Payne's study is an important addition to the expansion of local studies in civil rights historiography. His thesis elevates the rural dimension in studies of local communities. In addition, Payne identifies the continued relevancy of the rural intellectual legacy for contemporary problem solving." The Arkansas Historical, I could have gone, and I went into a deep dive, you understand, I'm a researcher. But I want to end with my favorite, and it actually turned up in the Arkansas Historical Quarterly. Maybe not a journal that everyone reads, but this is such a wonderful assessment of the work. Quote, "Charles Payne's book is at once a powerful affirmation of the human spirit and perceptive analysis of why social movements succeed and ultimately decline. It is the definitive history of the movement in Greenwood, SNCC's most important project. It is also the most perceptive analysis of grassroots organizing I have ever read. I've Got the Light of Freedom is quite simply the best social history we have of the Black freedom struggle in the South in the 1950s and 1960s. There's much wisdom in this book for scholars, for students, for activists, or for any citizen who is open to the possibilities of democracy." Close quote. Now, you know you've written a book when those are the words dedicated to describing what you've done. And I'm going to tell you, audience, I think I have a very good sense of self-esteem. Anyone who knows me knows that I probably believe I could do a lot of things. But let me tell you what I'm probably not going to do in the next couple of years. I'm not going to hop over to the discipline of sociology, write a field-shaking, learn its methods, and then write a field-shaking book, and then hop back over to history and live my life as a historian. That's what this man did. Do you understand? And we sat in graduate school going, what? This is a sociologist who did this? Who wrote what still stands as one of the best books in civil rights history. So Dr. Payne, I have to know, out of my own disciplinary preoccupations, how did you sociologists first decide that you were going to hop over the fence and pick up our methods to tell the story, and why? Why? Why do those people in Mississippi, right, in the organizing tradition that everybody failed to excavate, we'll talk about that next, right? Why did this take you into another realm?
Is my mic on? Can you hear me in the back?
No.
Yes, no?
Campus.
Here, do you want to use this? Yeah.
Just closer. How about now?
That's it.
A couple of things. First of all, thanks for all the kind words. It's been very difficult not to just laugh out loud. I know the truth about all of this. This is so far from what I am. To some degree, I am at least connected to the culture of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. At its core, a group of young Black college students.
Dr. Payne, we'll get to have trouble with that mic.
I'm sorry. At its core, young Black college students, and its beginning, very much the cutting edge of the movement, right? They're always the ones who are pushing. They're young folks, right? They're more radical than everybody else. And they have an analysis of culture that's probably deeper than any of the other well-known groups in that first half of the 60s. That's safe. Then it gets cloudy. Part of what they say is that this whole notion of individualization, that individual did that thing, is usually allowed, right? That individual did that thing as part of a social process. And then that individual got credit for what other people had done, right? So that in terms of how that book developed, that's sort of the story. There are an awful lot of people who sort of helped me see the value of trying to write a book through the eyes of elevators, right? Now, let me interrupt in this, and this. Let me see the hand of people who sort of have a sense of who Elevator was. See, that's just something really special about this audience, right? There's so many. And as the conversation goes on tonight, we will try to fill in some dots for everybody, because I think I am committed to the idea if you want to understand the 60s, you need to have a conversation with Elevator. Okay. And so that's very much a part of the book. The question about disciplines doesn't really apply, right? I was teaching my first course. Well, I started teaching on the civil rights. I started teaching courses on social change, and there was like 1 week in there on the civil rights movement. Black students in particular reacted to that 1 week. Then it became 2 weeks, became 3 weeks. And I just said, oh, I'll do a course on the movement. Very few materials at that time, 78, 79, very few materials for teaching the civil rights movement that were worth bothering you. As I was teaching that first course, there was a conference in 1979 in Jackson, Mississippi, the 15th anniversary of Freedom Summer, 1964, the summer that very, very many ways changed this country, right? It created to some degree what we think of as the activist 60s. That's partly connected to that, well beyond what we think of as the so-called civil rights. I created with that term. So I go to the conference, and the joke at the conference is that, said time and time again, is that the movement that we were in had two enemies. On the one hand, we had to deal with the sheriffs. On the other hand, we had to deal with historians, right? By which they meant that when they read histories of the movement that they had made, they could not recognize what people were talking about. All this stuff about Kennedy King. They didn't even think about Kennedy King unless it was practically appropriate at the given moment. That was not driving, right? And so it was just hilarious and just something. very angry at what academics had done to a history that they had made. And I'm thinking, well, hell, I can write better history than that. so that's the point of concept.
There was a story there.
I wasn't at all trying to think in disciplinary terms. But the question, remember the late 1970s. I started college in 66. You know what 66 was like? You know, the year of the Black Panther, the year of Rice. A year later, rebellion here in Newark. You know, I'm in Syracuse. It's a city of organizers. So I'm in all of this stuff, right? And at that time, it had seemed to me like it was going to take 5, 6, 7 years to change the world. Then I'd go and live the rest of my life, right? By the late 1970s, the energy in the Black community was somewhere else. So part of the question for me, going into the book, what the hell happened to the energy in our community, right? And to frame that against the Mississippi history, how the hell can people in Mississippi, how can they have had that much energy and direction, and we have so little now? Right? And again, the now was the late 1970s. So that was my question. And all I wanted was a usable answer to the question. And so what I'm saying is that's not a question which comes from any particular discipline, unless you want to consider organizing a discipline, right? And so I was trying to think like an organizer, where is the usable history, right? And so the notion of what discipline I'm writing from, I don't think I've ever thought about that until the very end. When I was finally through with this thing, which took me forever, I had careers in between, starting and ending the book. At the very end, I said, well, you know, what you're supposed to do, you're a sociologist, you ought to write a chapter at the end which talks about sociological theory. Because I know sociologists are not going to write this book. Not going to write this book. They don't talk enough about sociology, right? That's a social ego. And so I started it, and someplace I probably still have the notes for that chapter. It was just dull as hell. In the book, the narrative kind of drives you, right? You go from running one interesting thing to another. But when I tried to write the chapter about sociological theory of social movements, for those of you who are in the field, I met a gentleman a moment ago, it was resource mobilization. Was the big theory. It just felt brain dead to me, right? It wasn't adding. So I'm never going to write that chapter, and I never did. But that was the only time I thought about a disciplinary perspective. Disciplinary approach.
So you said something that takes me to the very introduction of the book. The question that you raised about, well, what happened, right? How did the people in Mississippi have this night, this fire, and it's sort of seemed to have dimmed in other places? One of the ways you describe what they're up against, and you know, as a person who researches and writes Southern history quite deeply, I often think we absolutely miss what people are up against when they choose to fight. This isn't like small bravery. This is big stuff. You write that the people who ultimately, who sign up to be voters, right? At the beginning, they're not voters. These are people who are facing, quote, reprisals, which were virtually certain, right? It meant that they would lose their jobs. Those who did join could expect to be shot at, and to have their churches bombed, and to have their homes targeted by arsonists. People who were able to survive winter months, right, because of the surplus commodities from the federal government, could expect to lose them. Farmers who needed loans to get their crops started, you know, they wouldn't get the loans. People who needed medical care could expect to be refused. And as one white landowner said, with completely unintended irony to a black family as he kicked them off his land, quote, "Your food, your work, and your very lives depend on good-hearted white people," close quote. And so you're asking a question is, what inspired these people? And that brings me to wanting to talk a bit about the organizing tradition that you estimated, which is, I think, one of the most important interventions of this book. And in my own work, you know, the hunt for African survivors, the obsession with cultural continuities in Black communities, like foodways and, folklore and dialect. People have a much easier time thinking about those things being passed down generation to generation than they do the freedom fight. So what you detected in this book was an organizing tradition, a Black tradition that was passed down of the fight. And that definitely helped to relocate where we were looking for the movement. So talk to us about excavating what so many people had missed, that there was an organizing tradition that was being tapped into. There was something Black people had been doing in fighting for all this time.
I mean, I think I would go back. I was determined to write from the intellectual perspective of Elevate. So what that means, what would Elevate, by looking at his situation, what would she center? Which parts of it would she find interesting? And the answer again and again is, she thinks that what is generative is the power that comes from the bottom.
Right.
Right? And that's not the only thing she thinks is generative, right? But she thinks the thing we usually miss when we try to understand society is how much potential, how much intellectual power, how much just social promise comes from people that we look down on, right? And so the question is always, when you look at any part of the history, what are the people at the bottom contributing to this that everybody else is not paying any attention to and giving credit for their work to somebody else?
Right.
Right? So it's just a matter of asking her question over and over and over again.
And so tell us about what you found in terms of the organizing tradition when you looked there.
Part of what I found you already read, right? And part of what animates me in my teaching, I want people to understand the price that was paid by quote unquote ordinary people. This notion that the movement was a top-down thing, that all these leaders and these eloquent speech makers made the difference. I want people to understand people gave up, in some ways, giving up your job is more difficult even than putting your life at risk for some people, right? But people put their families at risk. That's the real thing, right? You do something, and they kill your child. You do something, they're gonna come burn your house down and every damn body in it. And that's the choice you have to make, right? I wish that book, this thing come done. I taught for teachers at Newark a couple of weeks, so I looked at this material up over the weekend. And I had, Mr. Damer, killed in 1965 right after the Voting Rights Act. He tells every Black person, you can't pay your poll tax, I will pay it for you. If you're afraid to go downtown, I'll go downtown with you. Whatever you need to do, we're gonna put you straight. Right? He gets killed, his home is attacked that night. It's firebombed, his daughter is badly burned. His daughter and his wife only get out because he gets a gun and he shoots the Klan down. Right? He shoots at the Klan and he runs them off, but he himself is badly burned, and a day or two later he got in the hospital. And so I think that's in this. From his hospital bed, prior to his death, he sends out another radio message saying all Black people need to get up off their behind and go vote. And if you do not vote, you're a deadbeat on the stick.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the Damer story, right? A year later, someone in an oral history asked his wife, was it worth it? Was it worth it, right? Your children grew up without a father. Was it worth it? And she said something like, I go to the University of Southern Mississippi. When I go out there, there's a Black person driving the bus. When I go out there, I see Black professors. When I go out there, I see Black and white kids on St. Catherine's. This is what my husband wants. Yes, said one person. Damn, I don't want to fight against that. Right? It is that spirit that I want people to see. In all the years I've been teaching this stuff, I think it's the course I teach that had the most impact on students. All every time I don't teach. The sort of generic kind of reaction to it. A history in which they're studying how ordinary people make history. Is they think, well, damn, if these people can make history, I can make history. Well, I can do something that is socially sensitive. And of course, that's what I do as a teacher. But for black students in particular, the reaction is also, I think differently about my parents and my grandparents. I think differently about my parents. And what they mean is they've been carrying a kind of inarticulate shame, right, for their vision of what their grandparents were, for their vision that their grandparents just took it, right? And so this begins, this to be dealt with, to change. So in terms of what I think, I don't want to say context, but what is there in that tradition that's important to me, and I think important for us to preserve? Well, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a longer way to do that. So I actually want to read a passage. When I'm teaching, one of the things I like to ask my class, I'm going to ask some of y'all. Wait a minute.
Get
Suppose
ready.
it is 1930, and Charles Payne, who was a very, very wise man, comes along in 1930. You're in the Mississippi Delta, and Charles Payne tells you, I can tell you right now that 30 or 40 years from now, there's going to be a movement here against white supremacy. Right? Not now. Right now, everything is against you right now. Right? But only mostly certain families are going to participate in that movement. It ain't going to be everybody. Right? Tell me in 1930, which families are going to produce the people who in 1960 will change the sector? Tell me what kind of families they are. What do you look for? So, there is something.
Economic independence.
That's an excellent. It is an excellent, and that's absolutely true. The landowning farmers were in some ways the backbones of many. And when you had landowning farmers, black farmers, who lived next to other landowning black farmers, and that was really the heart. That was really the heart of resistance. That one's excellent. You've been reading something. You're focused out. And anything else?
People influenced by the UNIA.
That would. It doesn't show up in this particular research, but in general, right? When I'm trying to understand the Universal Negro Improvement Association, Marcus Garvey's organization, probably still the largest organization of black people possibly ever anywhere.
Yeah.
I am just amazed at how many people are affected, including Malcolm X through his violence, but many others are infected by the UNIA. That doesn't work for the Mississippi Delta very well so far as I know, but that's an excellent answer in general. Like UNIA is all over.
Could it be also the fact that Mississippi and the Lower South were already fighting for having a civil rights struggle, just in the sense of civil rights as it went to like contracts and things like that? Well, there's the book that just came out, 23, before the civil rights movements, that documents some of the legal and the court battles that black farmers, that black families had in the court system. So there was this, they had already been in the struggle for like civil contracts. So organizing around that, I believe it was Penny Roth that wrote the book for the civil rights movement.
I don't know that book. I mean, there's definitely sharecropping organizing in Alabama, Mississippi, attempts to organize
Right.
farmers in Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas in the 1930s. Not widespread. That's a good guess. I didn't find any of that, right? But the general principle that the activists of one generation are connected to the activists of another generation, in general, that principle sound.
Right.
So, and please, we're gonna take one. What?
Returning veterans?
Yes.
Yes.
You were going to do the returning veterans. Yes. Returning black veterans have an awful lot to do with starting the movement. We're starting the modern post-war movement, right? They come back with this wonderful story that's actually best told in John Ditmer's book, Local People. One of my favorite work in film with this. That book opens with Medgar Evers. He's back from fighting in Europe. First election, probably 1946. After the war, He puts on his uniform, he gets his buddies from the military, they put on their uniforms, and they march in uniform to the courthouse is open. Right? They get there and they are met with armed white men who say, no, not today. They go back for their guns, right? And somebody stops it there. But the symbolism, right? I fought for this damn country. I'm gonna have something. That is very, very much. So that's Medgar, that's Angie Moore, and so many of these folks are gonna be veterans who start the movement in the middle to late 1940s. That's excellent. But I'm talking about 1930, right? So let me read you some. It's cold stuff. Terribly sad. The families that I'm about to mention are some of the families who in the 1960s stepped out, and I was interviewing them about what were your grandparents like, what were your parents like. I was trying to summarize that in one chapter. People like the Greens and Mrs. Holt refused to allow women and their families to do domestic work.
Okay.
And listen to that. They would not let the women and their families go into white homes and clean or cook. That's out, right? The McGees wouldn't accept credit from whites. The Greens tried to give their children a sense of racial history. Mrs. McGee told her boys they could do anything that was legal. The Morgans wouldn't let white salesmen come to their house, but other people would not let white salesmen use that auntie or uncle stuff that they like to address. Black folk were. The common thread is refusal to see oneself as merely active pawn, as merely victim. These are families in which children were encouraged to believe that even within an oppressive social structure, one retains some control over one's lifetime. That is, for me, excavating the tradition, is finding these people who could not, in our standards, people who we would call powerless and oppressed, are still saying, there are things in my life I am going to control. Right? And they did that. Right? I did not appreciate when I was growing up with the fact that my grandfather, he was a hard man, he was a woodcutter, he was a hard drinker, you know the type. Hard worker, hard drinker, right? Never in his life did he owe 5 cents to a white man. Never, right? No matter how broke he was, no matter how poor he was, no matter how hard the times was. And you really look at a place and get that kind of credit easily, right? His position was once they have you in debt, they control you. Right. That's the first step. Don't give them that nickel, right? Is this you control what you can control. Right. Right. And so anyway, I'm gonna stop.
No.
Too long.
This is exactly what I want you to go on.
In terms of what is at the heart of the organizing tradition, it's teaching people efficacy.
Right.
Right.
No, I mean, and so you did something else. You're calling names. Ella Baker. People in South Carolina will know Septima Clark. Outside of South Carolina, they might go, ooh, what? Right? So you do something else in this book, which my graduate school classmates and I were like, this is everything that it needs to be. You put Black women in the center of this movement in a way. Chapter 9, you write, asked to name all the women they can think of who were associated with the civil rights movements of the 1960s. Most audiences are hard-pressed after Rosa Parks and Coretta King. In the South, a few may remember Mrs. Hammer. That so few women are remembered is ironic to understate it. In the Delta, in the rural South generally, women were in fact much more politically active than men, at least in the early 60s. According to COFO organizers, women took civil rights workers into their homes, of course, giving them a place to eat and sleep. But women also canvassed more than men. They showed up more frequently at mass meetings and demonstrations, and more frequently attempted to register to vote. There appears to be no disagreement with Lawrence Guyot's comment that, quote, it's no secret that young people and women led organizationally, close quote. Another organizer called the war in the Delta a woman's war. Talk about this. I mean, so much of the civil rights history has been framed as this excessively masculinist movement where Black men are asserting their place in a society that its biggest crime was to not let them be men. But here you find Black women doing the fight in the places where it's most hazardous, dangerous, deadly, and necessary. Other people miss that, Dr. Payne. And is this just what you were able to find by turning that observational lens someplace else?
Now you're clowning.
No!
You know, perfectly well. The academy is sections as anyplace else.
Mhm.
They miss it because they don't write the question.
That's right.
They're making the same kinds of assumptions about who matters in society as everybody else.
Mhm.
And so it's not that they miss it, it's that they're not looking for it, right? It's kind of hard, because looking for it really is kind of hard to miss, right?
Mhm.
Go out in Newark now and look at who's doing community work, it's gonna be the same thing,
Mhm.
right? When it's sort of with the same pattern. So again, if you look at it, if you will, from an Ella Baker SNCC perspective, SNCC goes into a town, its job is not, let's get an agreement to desegregate downtown. They don't really care about that. They may do it, that's not really what they care about. They come in, let's develop a cadre of leadership in this town that will be here permanently long after I go. And so if you go into communities with this notion, where's the leadership, right? Either leadership that is already there or leadership that we can develop, a lot of what you're gonna find will be women, right?
But I think it's so important to have documented that.
Yeah.
It's so important to have documented because we keep, lots of historians missed it.
That's good. I'm not gonna spot. They miss most things.
My people, what does Zora say? My people, my historian people, they do miss most things. And so if you're interested in getting your PhD in history, this is a great time. Because there are lots of topics that have been missed.
Yep.
Yes,
No,
indeed.
I'm not picking on history. I'm saying academics are not equipped to study race. They're not with a discipline.
Okay, now we have to talk about that.
So-
Academics, let's talk about that. Not equipped to study race.
Right.
Academics are not equipped to study race. Let's talk about that.
So, go on. Maybe I should.
Pick on the sociologist first.
Yeah, I was saying, apparently I started trouble about picking on the What can sociologists do? They cannot understand the role that they play in the ideological recreation of race. That's one. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They cannot understand the role that the profession plays in obscuring deep and useful research. So that I'm in sociology of education, North the teacher. In that area, the most useful kind of research is often descriptive and longitudinal. That kind of research will not do very much for your career if you want to wind up at Harvard, right? The values, the intellectual, methodological values of the discipline make it hard to see complexity.
Right.
And then when you begin to talk about the way in which, to some degree, disciplinary boundaries are disciplinary blinders, right? I mean, because we take these artificial slices of reality and we only look at them through this way, you cannot get to deeply embedded issues, historically constructed issues like race,
Right.
if you're going to take those kinds of boundaries seriously.
Right.
So in that sense, it's the disciplines themselves interfere with a kind of analysis that would be most useful.
Got it. And I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I have 500 more questions, but I'm going to just ask one more because I'm sure that the audience would want to ask many more questions. As I was rereading the book, I was thinking a lot, about how important and how valuable and how powerful the organizing tradition is. And at the end of the book, you're writing about Bob Moses, and you're writing about the way that Bob Moses was sort of reading education as the new frontier for the freedom fight. I think you said Bob Moses feels that the problems plaguing inner city youth are central organizing issues for these times. And I wish I could say that I could look out in America and have a hard time looking for the new frontiers of the freedom fight or what the organizing issues might do. So what I want to know from you is, what lessons do you think the organizing tradition that took root in the Delta, what lessons do you think they offer those who are organizing right now on the frontiers of the new freedom fight, both in their successes, and you do write in the book about the decline of the movement. So what lessons can we find in this book, both on how to get closer to freedom and also how to perhaps not have a movement disintegrate?
Uh-huh.
You know, I like to ask
Of
questions.
course I know the answers. If I wanted to, I can tell you. Unfortunately, I have another appointment.
I told you don't double book.
Let me answer in 2 words. I like to say that before I wrote this book, Du Bois wrote the book. I think I'm talking about Dusk of Dawn. That's the one thing. I think that's early 1930s. And in there, he writes that book in just 3 words. Everything you need that I wrote, in God knows how many pages, he said in 3 words. Pessimism is cowardice. Pessimism is cowardice. You think what you can do won't matter because you're afraid that it does. Right? That's what's awful. Right? That's what the old folk in Mississippi understood. Me and God can change this thing.
Right.
So that's one way to think about it. And you mentioned Bob Moses. I had the unpleasure of working with him on the algebra project for his post. I thought I said post-war activity. That's dumb. The project he worked on in the last part of his life was the algebra project, arguing that if you don't have quantitative literacy, you're going to be a sharecropper in the future. One of the things that I got from being around Janet Moses is this notion that you can always do movement work anywhere and everywhere you are, if you are committed to developing the leadership potential of the people around you. Right? You don't need no big demonstrations, you don't need to be giving a speech. You need to be thinking about how you can develop the people who are around you. Right? And so long as you're doing that in their context, that's the movement. The other stuff is window dressing, but it's something, but that's not the essence of it. And I thought about that. Steve Bannon, the Trump's
Steve Bannon,
said something just last week. Our strategy is to do 5 outrageous things every day, and the libs can only respond to 2. Right? And they're going to focus on some things, and those other things are going to make them, they just feel overwhelmed. Right? And I think that's exactly the way we feel in this environment. We just feel overwhelmed by how much stuff is coming down on us, on people we care about. And that kind of thinking, what Bob is saying, no, we can always be developing the people who are going to be resistant.
Yes. That's the education work.
Thus the
That's the education work. That's so passionate.
I was in a conversation. We are. I hope you're on the Cornwall Center. We're all mailing list. We're in a conversation with some of the folk who run the Black Agenda Project, Rita Baraka, Reverend Boyer, Riot, about a campaign to help people understand the importance of freedom schools, which they come out of the Mississippi movement. So I was in
Oh, thinking the microphone a little bit closer.
Oh, sorry. So I was in a conversation just a couple of days ago, actually, with some SNCC folk, and they were laughing in a kind of sardonic way. About 60 years ago, they were marching against the Klan in white sheets in Mississippi. And now they are marching against the brown shirts of MAGA in Minnesota, and just that juxtaposition. And anyway, we will be sending out. They're going to do some kind of presentation for us around schools. So people, but just it's got to be so strange when you think about what they tried to do 60 years ago. What it is for them to see it just attacked the way it had been attacked in the last.
Right,
Well, that's weird.
right, right. I think we should open it up so that I don't ask 500 more questions. Dr. Payne, thank you for indulging me.
That's good.
Goodness.
Stop and go. It's sad.
I don't know if I really did, but it's just.
Just like, yeah.
Dr. Payne, good to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
Okay, so there's been a lot written about the relationship between Ella Baker and Dr. King. And the fact that Ella Baker decided to separate SNCC from SCLC, which ultimately led to the activist characterization that you described. So I'm curious, and when you're researching and you're writing, what would you say about the relationship between Ella Baker and Dr. King?
It's pretty well documented, and she was very clear. It's close to a paraphrase. At the time of Montgomery, King is, I think, 28 years old. Right? Just now,
26.
no political experience of any sort.
Right.
It is decided by elders in the black community that he needs some experience support. By that time, Ella Baker had like 30 years of experience.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, so she's coming down, a woman in her 50s, and he's a boy, right? So there were some issues right there, but he's also a minister, right? And there's a certain kind of ego that is attached to that, right? So she goes down to be effectively the executive director of SLC. She has the contacts in the South and makes the organization work. And she said, I knew from the very beginning, there was never going to be a real place for me in leadership because I was a woman, right? And she goes on to talk about what we would call the misogyny of ministers in that group. Now, they may be right on the race question, but they tend to be wrong on the gender question. One of the things that did not happen is that she felt that, I'm going to say Dr. King, I don't know what I should be saying, Dr. King, SCLC leadership, did not treat the clerical staff appropriately, respectfully, right? And she was going to lead a march against Dr. King for the way he treated his staff. And he made some changes and it didn't happen. But that says something about it. So, I was also reading something from Seminal Clark the other day, who wound up being on the SCLC board, and she said, I knew perfectly well that as a woman, I could say what I wanted to say, and they'd pretend to listen, but they weren't paying me anything.
Right.
So again, Ella Baker confirmed that it was a sexist culture. Right.
Yeah.
And she also said very explicitly that when he was young, Dr. King could not interact with confident women. Right? He didn't. Now, again, he was 28, I think.
26.
26, thank you. 5 years later, he was a different person. I'm not sure that would have been as true. But that's where it was.
Yeah.
While other questions percolate, I do think it's real interesting that people miss how deep and long and old her organizing was in the South, especially with youth. You know, what was it, the Young Council of
Young Negroes
the Young Negro Cooperative. I mean, so she was in places like, that was 1930.
Right.
She was in places like Columbia, South Carolina. She was in all of these little, southern rural places trying to activate youth for so long before the 1960s, but to still be sort of discarded in that way is a part of it. Johnny, when I said, that's it. Yes, part of the tragedy of misogynoir.
Thank
Hi, Dr. Payne. Thank you for your wisdom. We appreciate that. I'm curious, now a lot of times when organizing is thought about, it may be a question of how it's funded. And so sometimes the response is that philanthropy can fund organizing. But what we heard in the opening remarks was about aunties, churches, people in the community who came together and gave of their homes, their time, their talent, and their treasure. Can you talk a little bit about how that may have been captured in your book, how people in the community came together to provide the resources necessary for organizing to take place? So not to negate philanthropy, but how did the community come together to provide the resources that were necessary for organizing to take place down in Greenville?
I'm not going to try to thumb through the pages, even though I bought the book to do that. But in chapter 4, there's a quote from Bob Moses about his first year in Mississippi. And he says something like, it was an experience he never had before and he never had since. He could go anywhere in Mississippi and somewhere down some dark road, there was a family that would take him in no matter what the circumstances were. If you needed to eat, they'd see that you ate. If you needed protection, they'd see that you were protected. Whatever you needed, the people sort of picked you up and carried you, right? So that quote is maybe the clearest expression of that. But it also, there's another, I think Penny Patch, a SNCC member, had this speech she gave a few years later, something like, there's a relationship between the fact that we're doing something real and the fact that we don't have any money, right? So SNCC workers, I think it was $10 and some cents a week in most, when that money was there, right? So they had to rely on on recognition. And folks like the Voter Education Project was fund them for a while, not get what they wanted, and they pull that fund, those funds back. Right? So they very much developed this notion of we don't want to be dependent on philanthropy. We want to use it without the use by.
Invest. I can use for.
So, to ask a follow-up, does your book say anything about Joanne Robinson?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, I teach about John Robinson. Okay, John Robinson in Montgomery was the head of the Women's Political Council, Caucus.
Yes.
It was a group of relatively well-educated black women who decided, don't trust me with numbers or dates, but around 1953, from the mid-40s on, as blacks were moving into the cities, one of the first points of contention when blacks have a little bit of freedom to go out those farms is how black women are treated on public transportation. Kelly had a beautiful essay on it. But there was nothing unusual about that. Rosa Parks had so much trouble with bus drivers. There were bus drivers who would not pick her up. And the one she had the thing with in 55 was one of her old antagonists, right? So this notion of how black women were treated in public conveyances, that was an ongoing source. So with Joanne Robinson, and the Women's Political Caucus protested, they wrote letters, and I think it's about 1953 when they write something to the mayor of Montgomery saying there will be a boycott if this stuff doesn't stop. And then, of course, they sort of symbolically responded to the voice about it. But John Robinson plays a real.
Yes.
Okay? And so that's the example of what I was talking about before, right? Everybody gives Dr. King and Ms. Parks. There's a real complicated, real long activist history. They don't see all the other folks. And there was always resentment when that happens, right? Ms. Robinson clearly has feelings about the fact she's been written out of history. Rudy Nixon, head of the NAACP, crucial to what happened, that he was written out of history.
Claudette Colvin, who lived in New Jersey.
I didn't know about the Jersey thing until she passed recently.
Right. Yeah.
What? I think.
We could go eat.
Yeah, well, that's the last question.
Hi. I was just wondering, you talked about like college students, like you talked about how they're open with week-wise at that house. What are the things you like research? I was wondering is like college students in the crowd, like what is something that we should do or maybe like avoid in dealing with this, like, the challenges that we're facing so far. And you mentioned like that they saw the Africana path, so kind of in anticipation of like, you know, joining movements and being a community, what do we need to do and what should be avoiding? Yeah. Should be.
Why, it's always the last question.
That was a great final question.
In a way it is. The one thing that one of the things that worries me about young people who want to be a part of political change because we're all raised on these dramatic images of what social change is, what the anti-war movement was, the speeches, and all its demonstration, is that they want to do something big, right? They want to sort of start at the top. Well, I don't want that sort of. They underestimate the value of the mundane. Like that's what I'm trying to say. Bob Moses had this thing that we did not have it figured out in the beginning, right? It just wasn't like that. You break off a little piece of the problem that you think you can do something about. You work on that with an open mind, and that will connect you to other pieces, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're doing something structural, right? But you don't necessarily have to start with a structure, right? You break off a piece of the problems just that you think you can do something with, and you assume that what you can do matters. To go back to the people I was talking about, you assume that what you can do matters, and you don't put pressure on yourself to be like the activist of the 60s. That's just deadly.
And you know what you two just did? There's a nice synchronicity here. Because that really, as you described, is the inspiration for the title of the book. This little light of mine, right? That you're looking for every person has a light, something that they could bring to the freedom fight, right? That it's not something that only the most visible, the most eloquent speakers, the speech givers have at movements, that every person carries a little light, and that's actually necessary. That's where the movement happens. That's where it happens. So,
Now, before you about to wind up, right?
well,
Let me
coming.
say, I just want to say, before we end, I want to thank Melissa, I want to thank Christina. I mean, they are the two motivating forces behind this. So could we give them a round?
Thank you for doing this. Reading books like yours that, you know, definitely put a little extra fire in my life to do the work too. So thank you.
Thank you.
I should also thank, since we're thanking people, definitely thank Christina Strasburger. She is a dream maker. I just go to Christina like, I have a vision, and she always helps to actualize it for the benefit of the community, for our students, for everyone. So we're so grateful for you, Christina. Always thank you. We'd also like to thank the Source of Knowledge Bookstore for having copies of We want to thank for the wonderful food that you're going to eat. The Weekend Spot for dinner. That is a Black woman-owned business right here in Newark. So if you love it, and I want to thank you all for coming. Happy Black History Month, and thank you for being an amazing audience.